Presenting now is Professor George Wolasi Kwasi-Dor, a Ghanaian Ewe. He is the McDonnell Barksdale Chair of Ethnomusicology, Professor of Music, and the founder and director of the African Drum and Dance Ensemble at the University of Mississippi. Professor Dor is a consummate musician, scholar, composer, performer, teacher, and cultural patriot. Professor Dor was the 2025 Ethel Corey Distinguished Lecturer at the University of Michigan's School of Music, Dance and Theatre. His symphonic works have been performed in Ghana, USA, and Germany. A 2022 citation by the University of Ghana School of Performing Arts recognized Professor Dor as a national musical icon of Ghana and distinguished contributor to Ghanaian art music and African musicology. He will be presenting The Toll of Rigid Positionalities on Representing the Music of Africa, interrogating a 2024 one-day symposium on Borborbor at the University of Ghana.
Wolasi Kwasi-Dor. The Toll of Rigid Positionalities on Representing the Music of Africa, interrogating a 2024 one-day symposium on Borborbor at the University of Ghana. Before I begin with my paper, let me play an aspect of Borborbor music, which I'll be referencing in this paper. Thank you. While prejudices and subjective individualities resulting from the intersectional identities of each researcher have been debated in African music within the framework of the insider-outsider, etic-emic, or native foreigner binarism. This paper focuses rather on the positionalities of African-born researchers in African music research. Drawing on a symposium on Borborbor dance drumming that we held at the University of Ghana in the summer of 2024, I argue that two key participants allowed their affiliations with and advocacy for the promotion of African heritage and culture in academia to create rigid positionalities respectively. Along with their attendant daily habitus, they have become traditionalists whose hermeneutical and heuristic lenses have been extremely clouded by their professional careers and goals. I suggest that a team of other symposium participants were more progressive in interrogating the changes and appropriations that have occurred in Borborbor through the creative agency and ingenuity of every youth. The aim of this paper is to demonstrate how extreme positionalities can inform representation of the music of Africa. While this paper does not seek to condone ethnocentric representation of African music, it advocates flexibility in the use of ethnographic approaches and conceptual frameworks that work for African music research beyond concerns of only provenance. Also, although subsuming Borborbor under the right taxonomy can inform the researcher's positionality to possibly favor a postmodernist worldview that accommodates appropriations and blurring of boundaries between genres, And while exploring the pace of change in Borborbor as against those of the serious evidences have implications for positionality, this paper focuses on rigidity and flexibility in positionality. Further, I draw on Timothy Rice's 1987 theoretical model to explain how such a paradigm can be deemed meaningful for the progressives, but irrelevant for traditionalists because of their rigid positionalities. The paper concludes with examples from Kofi Agawu's scholarship that suggests positionalities and flexibilities in his advocacy for fair representation of the music of Africa. But first, what is positionality? Positionality in research may be defined as an individual's peculiar social, cultural, and professional location, intersections of one's identity markers, including race, gender, class, education, or how personal histories, ontological, and epistemological assumptions influence one's worldview in relation to their research topic, design, interaction with participants, and interpretation of data. Further, researchers' positionalities can be described as either rigid or flexible, depending on the habits they exhibit in relation to their research. Yet, unexamined positionality can negatively affect the quality of research projects. To elucidate the preceding, I now discuss a few positionality-related experiences, including my observations during a Borborbor Symposium. Yes, rigid positionalities can impoverish the quality of representation in African music research based on prejudice against the provenance of an interpretive framework or theories that may underpin the design of a research project. Meanwhile, in his key address at the Second International Symposium of the ICTM African Music Study Group, Kofi Agawu had asserted that appropriate theory in African music research, for example, should not depend on its provenance. Rather, it must be judged by what works best for Africa and Africans. To paraphrase him, for certain interpretive frameworks and general worldviews have cosmopolitan applicability. Allow me to use two examples to elucidate their salence for interpreting Borborbor. First, let's look at Timothy Rice's model for studying music as historically constructed, socially maintained, and individually created, applied, and experienced. Given that Borborbor's life spans 7 decades, one should expect transformations which have occurred in the genre being partly precipitated by social changes within every communities to which these practitioners belong. So whether one conducts a diachronic or synchronic historical study of Borborbor, change and continuity can be ascertained by comparing the dances practiced during the 1960s to 1990s or 2020s, for example. Certainly, changes in the song tests and types, instrumentation, dance movements, influence of changing local and global sonic ecologies, demographic terrains, and expanding scope within which Borborbor has been performed, and additional performance contests and their attendant meanings as peculiar to each decade, then becomes products and partial articulations of the preceding style shaping determinants and the temporalities of their creators. Then the cultural textuality of Borborbor in the 1960s will not be the same as that of the 2020s in Agawu's terms, or framed in Daniel Newman's theoretical balance. Borborbor in the 1960s and 2020s will represent separate immanent cultural histories of the AV that developed from decades of change. Refocusing on rice, one may ask, if music is historically constructed, then why should a preservationist label the leaders of the Evangelical Presbyterian Church Ghana as hypocrites because they denounced the introduction of Borborbor into the church in the 1950s into 1970s, but later embraced the same genre in its worship since the 1980s? The preceding is a result of relentless advocacy for the change by avicultural enthusiasts in the church that facilitated the cherished shift in liturgical paradigm, though. The extent to which Borborbor provides an avenue for interactions, expression of community values through creativity, as well as numerous social events during which Borborbor dance is performed, reverberates with the social maintenance of the genre as the most popular AV dance. Yet, since the genre's invention by Kojo Nwatro in the 1950s, individual composers of songs and newer drum languages or rhythmic motifs, choreographers, trumpeters, drum carvers, and leaders continue to engender growth in the genre's relevance to both performers and audiences. As my second example, I draw on a modified version of Kimberly Crenshaw's theory of intersectionality, and whereas its racial component does not apply to the case of Borborbor, discourses emerging from the various intersecting identities should be crucial in any convincing scholarly interpretation of the genre. During the Legon Borborbor Symposium, one of the preservationist cultural intellectuals vehemently criticized the church for hijacking Borborbor. However, how can we forget to acknowledge that the performers of Borborbor are not only Hebrew, they are also Christians, Ghanaians, Africans, youth, and finally cosmopolitans or citizens of the world, yielding a symbiosis of ethnic, national, biological, and socially constructed youth, continental, and global identities. As such, their intersectional identities enable them to intentionally draw on and from all or any of the above sources of discourse and other resources in their creative habitus, thereby leading to intercultural and intertextual dimensions and dynamics that define their innovations and are ultimately reflective of their refined, novel, collective, and individual craftsmanship. As the ABC, Ehegbeye Hedona, which translates to a bird must speak the language of birds. While traditionalists will intuitively interpret this adage to align with their advocacy for every youth to speak traditional every musical language, the progressives will argue that the musical meta languages that are inherent in Borborbor music are many. Beyond containing a significant body of indigenous Epe music cultural domains, general youthful musical sensibilities, Christian doctrine and hymnody, as well as domesticated appropriations from national and global soundscapes, are all embedded in today's Borborbor music. So to claim that the church has hijacked Borborbor, in my mind's eye, constitutes a failure to accept the reality that contemporary epic Christian youth are legitimately using their own favorite dance drumming genre as an outlet for expressing their faith. They are not stealing anything from indigenous epic culture. Indeed, the Progressive Symposium participants pointed at how all heavy, including the preservationist cultural intellectuals, must rather be happy that Borborbor is now apparently performed in churches that hitherto strictly denounced and prohibited African music and dance in Christian liturgy for over a century in some cases. Revitalization of traditional African cultural practices, including dances, are not exclusively limited to the academy. They extend to the modern state and church institutions and are manifested in their agencies. It follows that African politicians and clergy, like academics, are all pervasively influenced by prevailing broader overarching ideologies and zeitgeists that occupy their consciousness, and in this case, the AV, who are all striving in their various departments of life to reclaim aspects of their African identity, even when the modes of expression avoidably remain intercultural. Yet, such considerations may not matter to scholars who adhere to rigid positionalities while representing African music. To echo Agawu's questions, let me ask, who defines African music? From where? With what authority? And under what assumptions? Now, some lessons from reflections on Kofi Agawu, representing the music of Africa, and positionalities. For more than 3 decades, Kofi Agawu remains the most persuasive advocate for fair representation in African music scholarship. And titles and discourse of his books, articles, themes, and contents of special lectures and keynote addresses and even courses that thoughtfully or partially provide ample evidence of his leadership in the preceding intellectual activism. No wonder he is the main keynote speaker for this symposium that uses the title of his thought-provoking book as the symposium theme. However, when one reviews Agawu's works to ascertain his positions and positionalities on representing the music of Africa, one may be tempted to conclude that there seems to be shifts and perhaps even contradictions in his advocacy. For how can Agawu, who is a staunch advocate for African epistemologies, be the same person who had asserted that the provenance of a theory does not matter for that theory to be appropriate for African musicology? Furthermore, how can the same scholar critique Western tonality as a colonizing force in Africa? And yet, Agawu has publications that contain revealing extended analysis of the art music compositions of Amu, Nketia, Yuba, and Uzoigwe, as well as a recent article in which he redirects his hermeneutic attention rather to the relevance and satisfaction that works in the same Western functional tonality constitute for their patronizing communities. I argue that Agawu operates with an appreciable degree of flexibility in his positionalities, depending on the context and the subject matter at hand. More tellingly, it is his desire to tell the multiple sides of an ethnographic story or encounter, or to tell the whole story regarding the themes, genres, and areas he specializes in. Such a flexibility comes with a deep understanding and appreciation of global dynamics of intellectual worldviews, but above all, maturity of the researcher. Further, Western-styled multipass singing or playing alone does not prevent does not present the whole story of the music experience during a typical Presbyterian church service, for example.
Hello, Prof.
Despite the functional harmonies, one will certainly notice the expressive behaviors of worshippers that suggests the extent of relevance and satisfaction that these liturgical musical types offer worshippers. So to tell the whole story, the participant, observer, ethnographer at such a church service may choose to interrogate the phenomenological domain of music making instead of or in addition to discourse on the colonial legacy as exemplified in the Western tonality of the music. This other side of the musical experience was exactly what Agawu captured in his article, whose decolonization prospects for decolonizing African art music. As such, I maintain that one can advocate for change in an aspect of a musical practice, but can also write on another intriguing facet of that tradition. This is not a contradictory behavior, but an act and initiative that stems from the researcher's commitment to telling the whole story.
Hello, Prof.
Regarding provenance of theories, let us consider Idwosai's Orientalism, as scholars may draw on cross-cultural perspectives that have salience for their advocacy. Whereas the promotion of African epistemologies is pivotal for representing African music fairly in research, other well-renowned scholars from other parts of the world are grappling with similar challenges in representation. So, why cannot Agawu be drawn to Idwosais, whose Orientalism thematizes, critiques, and contests Western scholars' habitual negative hegemonic constructs of the East and unfair representation of Asia with prejudiced, rigid positionalities? By extension, Kofi Agawu, whose earlier research and teaching focused more on only traditional African music, now has book chapters, or articles devoted to African popular music and African arts music. Even in the classroom, Agawu develops and teaches graduate courses on African arts music because he does not want to deprive his students of knowledge on that category of African music, and because he wants to tell all the stories. Due to extremist positionalities, some African-born music scholars do not fully acknowledge and appreciate the phenomenal contributions that key foreign African music scholars have made to African musicology. On the contrary, any standard publication of Agawu includes perspectives of key relevant European and American contributors, while other colleague African music scholars engage in unhealthy positionalities tainted by prejudices of race and tribalism, and they will hardly cite works of scholars who do not belong to their ethnic groups. Some find it difficult to cite works by their students or younger generation of prospective African music scholars, even when these publications are relevantly seminal. Excuse me.
Prof,
We can learn lessons from Kofi Agawu to avoid such unhelpful, rigid positionalities. In conclusion, I hope I have foregrounded the importance of flexibility in positionalities over rigid positionalities. And in our individual or collective interventions to tell the whole story, while representing the music of Africa, I have given reasons why we cannot afford to overlook important perspectives that can enhance our various research projects. Finally, we have the power and the will to overcome ways, prejudices of race, tribalism, gender, religion, age, class, education, demography, and professional habitus yield rigid positionalities in African music scholarship. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much, Professor Daw, for that wonderful presentation. I think we have 5 minutes more left for Q&A in your time allocation. So thank you so much. So perhaps we have those who have questions or few things to ask Professor Daw. You are welcome to. Do we have any question online or here with us, the organels? Online, do we have question? Kindly raise your hand and we're happy to invite you.
Oh, yeah, no, that's the mic. Oh, it's on.
Okay. Do we have question? You have question, huh? Oh, okay, that's not a question. Okay, let me check on. I think. Okay. Do we have any question? Any clarification needed from Prof? Okay. Professor Agawu.
I cannot see the.
You are there.
No.
So just briefly, because the silence is becoming rather oppressive. George, first of all, congratulations on your paper. The reception for us was not as clear. There's some distortion in the transmission. So, there may be details in what you said that we did not follow. But I just wanted to say something about this notion of positionality, which has become, at least in the US, has become the thing. It's almost as if there's now a ritual to perform your positionality every time you get up to present something, So I'm this, I have one leg, I'm whatever you want to say. It's a construction, of course. And I sometimes wonder why we are now interested in these performances of positionality, because it's coming from you, right? It's not. I always thought that the related idea of identity was more in other people's interest than in the individual's interest. That is that people who are interested in classifying you, who therefore do not understand, and I'll just be personal here, how you could be writing on Mahler Symphony and then writing on Ave dirges. They don't get it. But that's their problem. That shouldn't be my problem. And the more energy you put into exercise, into trying to explain this, the more you are taking time away from the next article or the next book or the next exchange with a scholar. So I always feel we should interrogate these values that creep into academia, almost as if this is what we should be doing, or we must do this. You must establish your positionality. And so I don't know whether this relates at all to what you were doing. I enjoyed what you had to say, and thank you very much for it.
Yeah, distinguished Professor Agawu, thank you for your thoughts. But as a matter of fact, I am aware of how people use their positionalities to vindicate themselves. That is not my idea. From the observation, I'm saying it can happen to all of us. We need to be mindful of our individualities and how they shape our interpretation. So if we don't take time, we're talking about embodied knowledge. Because of our habit behaviors, we become so rigid to the extent that even when our colleagues are making valuable contributions, instead of paying attention or listening to them, because of our rigid positionalities, we don't listen to them. So that is the idea. It's not simply what to show that I am so and so, I'm so and so. But the fact is that positionalities sort influence our research. This is where I am coming from. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you. I think we can take one more question for Professor George Doe. Then do we have one more perhaps online or here with us? Then we can, yeah. Okay, let's see. Yeah, okay. Okay, I think, thank you so much, Prof. It was, I think, it's a quite insightful presentation. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, and thanks for your patience, and thanks for the beautiful presentation. Let's give Prof and the session presenters a round of applause, please.